Hello and welcome to the Old Sword Club. I was going to say weekly live streams. I say that at the start of all of them. This one's like an extra special live stream. But yeah, hello everyone. For those who don't know, I'm Tim. I'm instructor person at the Old Sword Club. Also probably relevant to today. I actually work in the education sector, so I have very strong opinions about teaching. How valid or informed they are is, well, really up to you as the audience. But today I'm joined by Kaja Sadowski, who just has probably one of the most amazing CVs I've seen in a while. They've been a instructor of physical skills since 2004, having taught figure skating, rock climbing, and mountaineering before coming to martial arts in 2010. And then becoming a coach in 2012, which is just really, really cool. In the space of 2 years, beginning with a beginners program, then moving into and then teaching both group and private lessons to students, really all experience levels and across multiple countries, which is really, really cool. From I guess like a sword geek kind of perspective. Kaja's famous weapons are rapier and longsword, but they also teach unarmed striking, grappling, and knife combat. Although sort of within that, I guess kind of like most of us who are just massive sword nerds geek out about both historical and historical and modern martial arts and everything from sort of practical self-defense and professional use to just kind of more academic historical stuff. Kay was even involved in the civilian auxiliary with the Vancouver Police Department's Force Operations Training Unit from 2015-2020, which is really, really cool. Like, that just sounds awesome.
That's a weird one, yeah.
Yeah, it really does. Cool, so yeah, welcome, Kaja.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. So the way we're going to do things is we're just going to do this as kind of a Q&A, but I've got some questions lined up. So if you do have a question, just ask in the chat and we will get to it as soon as we can. And then we're just going to go through. Kaja's going to probably do most of the talking, and I'll try and add some thoughts where I think it's going to be helpful. And yeah, we'll go from there. So first question, and I'll be honest, like all of these were things that Kaja and I discussed well ahead of time. So, to be the things we wanted to nerd out about. But so first question is, how do you see the relationship between a martial arts practitioner and a teacher? E.g., do you think senior students should be required to teach as part of their development?
So this is an interesting one that I have strong and potentially controversial opinions on, I think.
Excellent. We like the controversy.
So there is a very, very strong tradition in many martial arts of teaching being a natural and integral part of your progress as a practitioner. In karate and taekwondo and a lot of Eastern martial arts, once you're a black belt, part of what you do as a black belt is you teach beginners. The very first Hema and swordplay school that I went to had that kind of built into their curriculum as well, that once you reached a certain rank within the school, you would teach beginner programming, and being an instructor was part of your learning, I guess. And the idea was, or the way that it's often pitched, is that teaching others helps you solidify your own knowledge, your own understanding of the material, and B, that it's a way of kind of giving back to the community. There's a lot of the personal development side of martial arts leans pretty hard into community service and so on. So there's this idea that part of what you do to give back to your martial arts community is you teach. And the sort of unspoken third reason that it happens a lot is that the financial sustainability of running a martial arts school is garbage. And if you can get your students teaching for free, or better yet, paying you dues while still teaching, then that makes life a lot easier. And I know that that's a reason that a lot of places end up making that choice, whether they really want to or not. So that's kind of the landscape of what I think is kind of like the standard way of doing things in martial arts. And I think it's trash. I think it's terrible. And the reason for that, and like, you know, exploitive labor practices are a thing. We can set that aside for the moment. Yeah. Capitalism is bad. There we go. You know my political views. Or at least capitalism as we currently practice it is inherently exploitive. Sorry, Tim, I'm coming in hot. But the biggest problem with that kind of structure, and the biggest problem with just assuming that everybody's going to teach at a certain point in their student progression, is that being a good practitioner of a skill and being a good teacher of that skill are two completely different things. You can be a very good sword fighter and an absolutely terrible teacher. And you can be a thoroughly mediocre sword fighter and somebody who teaches very well. They are different skill sets. There's basically no relationship between the two. And not only that, but fighting good and teaching good require very different, like, human skill sets. One is physical. It involves a fair bit of intellectual work. You need to, and some interpersonal stuff as well, right? Like, you need to be good at reading your opponent and being able to predict what they want to do next and being able to respond to their emotional state. So there is a certain amount of like interpersonal dynamics to it, but it's an inherently adversarial thing. And also most of what you're doing is developing a physical skill set. Teaching is communication. It's knowing how to talk to people. It's knowing how to convey ideas in multiple different ways. In particular, it's helping different kinds of brains and different kind of people get their head around something. Whereas in fighting, if you want to fight efficiently, it's almost the opposite. You tend to kind of narrow down options to the thing that works best for you and throw out a lot of the West. So the intellectual development for the two paths can be quite divergent. But I think the biggest problem with assuming that everybody should teach, besides the fact that, like I said, it's not necessarily related or relevant, is that there's generally no infrastructure for making sure they teach well. The overwhelming amount of the time, and I've gone through this myself as a junior instructor in a few different places, not just in martial arts, but in a bunch of movement communities, you just kind of get thrown in. It's like, you know stuff, just tell people how you do the stuff. Here's our curriculum. It's a 2-page outline of the skills that you need to communicate. Now go communicate them.
You have knowledge, give knowledge to person. Yeah. It's
exactly.
Like
it's take knowledge, put in skulls. You can do that, right?
Yeah.
And like, that's not how pedagogy works. That's not how learning works. And so what you often end up with as a byproduct of this system is a whole bunch of people who don't have teaching skills, have no real means of acquiring those skills because there's no infrastructure to support them. And on top of that, are probably actually really disinterested in teaching. Because in my experience, out of every like 50 martial arts practitioners, including really avid ones, there's maybe 1 or 2 that actually have any interest at all in teaching. And the rest of them do it because they have to.
I mean, that's been my experience.
Yeah.
A lot of martial arts. Actually, just as a kind of a historical aside before we get back into this, I actually have a theory that one of the reasons why so many martial arts become ineffective over time is exactly because of this, that in the case of some martial arts, it's because to get past, like, once you get like first dan or whatever, you have to start teaching to get to second dan. Or alternatively, like the case something like Western boxing, after you retire as a fighter, the only way to make money is as a coach. And so you start teaching, then what happens is you get people who may be fantastic fighters who've built up the reputation of this martial art, then go and teach, but they can't teach very well, and so none of their students can fight. And when their students go on and teach, the students haven't learned how to fight, so they don't actually know. They don't even have like the level, sort of mediocre level of knowledge they need to teach it. So even if they can teach, they can't pass it on. But most of them also haven't learned how to teach because they don't have that modeled for them.
Yeah. No, I tend to agree. I think that many martial arts do themselves and their own traditions an enormous disservice by completely ignoring the fact that teaching is a skill set. by not training people, by not recognizing that people who are good at it or who are at least interested and emotionally invested in it should be the ones to do it, and by not being open to tools from the outside for teaching. And that's not always the case. Like there are some, and you know, I've met a good number of martial arts instructors who are absolutely fantastic teachers. But often they kind of just came by that knowledge by accident.
Yeah. Well, actually,
they happened to have skill, or they brought it in from somewhere else. It's very rare for pedagogical skill to kind of develop within a martial art unless you got lucky and the person who founded it was an amazing teacher who wanted to teach other teachers to teach good.
Yeah. Well, actually, interesting enough, so in education theory, we're now starting to see intelligence as much more diverse, much more disparate than you thought, rather than being like a linear scale. There's this idea that there are different types of intelligence. So we talk about, the big one you hear about is emotional intelligence.
Right.
But most models have like 7 or 8 types of intelligence, and a lot of them actually have teaching intelligence. Like some people are naturally good teachers. The idea is like some people are naturally good teachers. And I think that's kind of what you get. And I have seen that in bad martial arts where you get someone who has a natural inclination for teaching, can kind of teach again, which is really, really interesting. Which is also kind of how I sort of fell into teaching a bit without much formal training, and sort of gone out and like just read up on it. But yeah, like that was kind of a thing for me. Like I remember when I was doing Taekwondo, I was always looking for ways to kind of just change how we're approaching things. But yeah, no, I definitely agree that, you know, we shouldn't be requiring people to teach just because they're a good fighter. I guess also professionally, I find it a bit insulting, the idea that someone has no training or
any asshole can do your job.
Yeah, it's just like, you know, it's that whole thing of, you know, those who can do, those who can't teach. It's like, no, teaching.
Oh, few things enrage me as much as that statement.
Oh, God. So frustrating.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, the way I found that really worked effectively in expressing that, because I think trying to express this idea that teaching is not teaching is a separate skill to a lot of martial arts can be really hard, is actually explaining it in role-playing terms. You're like, all right, well, the instructor is the game master, and, you know, the people, like the students coming to class are the players. And sure, like the game master needs to be a decent player, but most players won't become game masters, which is why it's really hard to get a role-playing group together. But yeah, that was kind of my metaphor for how at least how I approach teaching, but I think how it should be approached generally.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the next question. What do you wish you knew about teaching before you started?
You know, I think I came up with this question and now I'm stumped. No, I personally came into teaching martial arts. I started teaching really early. I got looped into the students teach as part of their progression system. And also because I came into martial arts with a fair amount of physical experience and with some physical teaching experience as well, people were like, oh, Kaja can move good and knows how to teach. We should get them into a teaching position like immediately. And so I knew very little in terms of what challenges were ahead of me or how I should be approaching things. But I think the biggest thing that I wish I'd known then, and that has absolutely informed all of my teaching going forward, is that single right answers kind of don't exist. That because fighting is such a complex and dynamic thing, because the outcome of an exchange between fighters relies on all of their physical attributes, their emotional and mental state at the moment, their tactical skill and tactical knowledge and ability to make decisions under pressure, the way that they respond to stress and adrenaline, as well as the geometry of their swords and their bodies interacting with each other. there cannot be a single correct way to solve any problem.
Mm.
Or at the very least, if you come up with a best, a most effective answer, you're like, okay, in this particular situation, you probably want to try this first because it tends to have the best odds of success. That's going to look very, very different from person to person and pair to pair. And there was a real tendency that I fell into when I started martial arts of like, I need to make sure it looks right. I need to make sure I look like my teacher, who in turn looks like the plates in the book. And I got lucky in that, like, I'm a little over 6 feet tall. I'm quite thin. I got long arms, big shoulders, a lot of reach. And my first swordplay instructor was over 6 feet tall, long limbs, big shoulders, a lot of reach. And so generally speaking, it was quite easy for me to look like him and to move like him in certain ways and to emulate exactly how he did stuff. And that was kind of what I internalized and tried to pass on to my students. And the first time I dealt with a beginner who was 5 feet tall and heavy set and had short reach, the only tool that I really had available for helping them was, well, have you tried harder? Have you tried doing it better? Have you tried? And like you fall into, okay, well, you're maybe not doing the technique quite right. Here, I'm going to make all of these micro adjustments to the particular thing that you're trying to do in order to try to make it work. Instead of stepping back from it and going, maybe the solution that works for me is not going to work for you in this particular case. And what we should be doing is developing your problem solving skills as an extension of your body and the way that it works right now, rather than trying to shove you into an idealized form that might be based on something that is literally impossible for you to attain. And I had a lot of frustration with that in the beginning. I'm sure I, fucked up a good number of students as well.
Oh yeah, I think this is, I guess, this is kind of the thing when you're learning to teach martial arts, is you have to accept that you're
going to fail people.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we have it a bit easier in that what we do is recreational. So, people, like, no one's going to get too upset about the fact that you weren't a good teacher from the get-go. Whereas, yeah, I've had students come back to me and just be like, hey, I've heard that you've improved your teaching. Can you show me what you're doing now?
Nice.
I literally had that. They're just because they were friends of mine. We got along as people, and like, well, it's going to be fun either way. But I think the problem solving thing. I mean, for me, that was a big kind of light bulb moment with my teachers. I'm like, oh, this is all just problem solving, because I up until I did boxing and wrestling. Even in Hema, which I got into because I thought this is more dynamic and pressure tested and cooler than the more traditional martial arts I've been doing.
Right.
They still had that traditional pedagogy of you get told what to do and then you copy it and you copy it and you copy it and then
you copy it until it's perfect and then you perform it.
Yeah, and I see what I found. Also going back to your point about how you had a similar physicality, like similar height and wingspan and stuff to a lot of people in your class. When I'm 6'4", when I was first doing Hema, I was probably right in the middle of the height spectrum. There were some people that were this much taller than me, and there were some people that were this much taller than me. And everyone had the longest broadsword they could, and the goal was just to snipe people from miles away.
Right, that's a really specific meta that's going to serve certain fighters really well and utterly roll the rest.
Well, I was in the rolled category. The thing for me was, I was in the rolled category. What got me into Hutton specifically, other than the fact that I'd gotten really interested in 19th century history at uni, was I'm like, this actually gels with how I want to fight, and it's a shorter, lighter weapon, and if I can get a good parry or wrong foot my opponent or just something, I can actually and get a little bit closer, I can fight. Not necessarily well, this wasn't necessarily successful of that, but it was fun. I liked it. I actually prefer to fight a lot closer than most people my height like to do. Most people like just as far away as they can. I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. I think even something like temperament, just how you naturally want to approach things, is such a huge impact on hang and fight. And I think that that problem solving thing of, okay, each, a sword fight is just an incremental series of puzzles that you need to solve, or problems that you need to solve. I think, and also teaching that, going to someone, all right, well, here, you've got this problem to fight, let's sit down and problem solve through it. Like, for me, I think that was a really big light bulb teaching moment where, and like actually realizing that was where I moved away from just getting people to do techniques in lines, or thinking that if instead of doing the techniques at the air, you do that at a target, that's dynamic teachers.
That fixes everything.
Yeah, it's like that was probably my big light bulb moment. If there's one thing I wish I knew about teaching earlier, it would be to view everything as problem solving. So.
Yeah, that really changes how you approach everything, huh?
Oh yeah, totally. And it's a big thing as well, because usually the point where you do that is the point where your fencing club goes from being an old guard who all look really similar, and a bunch of and then a bunch of noobs who have been there. You can tell how long they've been there by how frustrated they look. To actually having like a diversity of people.
Absolutely.
Having students who are very different shapes. So yeah. So I've got an audience question that's kind of come off the back of what we're just talking about.
How do you make instructors not suck? So, oh God. So, and I'm sure Tim's going to have strong opinions on this as well. You've got two career teachers here being like, I have feelings. So first of all, don't force everybody to teach if they don't wanna. Actively recruit people who are actually interested in teaching. It doesn't matter if they have skill or not. Just people who actually want to do it, who actually give a fuck about it. Because disinterested teachers are poison. Teachers who do not want to be there, teachers who are not emotionally invested in the success of their students, will ruin your damn school. There's nothing worse for beginners than somebody who doesn't actually care if they grow or not, or for any students for that matter. I think one of the things that I would really like to see, and it's something that I'm pushing for to a certain extent within sword fighting, is a measure of professionalization. Not in the sense of everybody must have X certificate and must do, X amount of continuing ed hours every year and so on. Although in all honesty, I wouldn't object that much to that model if we actually found a decent cert, which doesn't currently exist. But treating teaching as an important, valuable thing that is an integral part of a martial art growing. Having teachers who come to events or who do guest workshops or what have you get paid for their work, or at least get infrastructure to be able to do that work. Because right now the biggest thing that I see, and like I do, one of the things that I kind of do alongside teaching is I do a fair bit of consulting for other Hema instructors. And martial arts instructors. And one of the big things I run into over and over and over and over, and that's also what I see when I visit other clubs, is that instructors are going it alone. The backyard club is in many ways still the archetype of what happens in Hema, and it's a couple friends who started fencing in their backyards, and all of a sudden they're in charge of a school. And there are no external resources for them to draw on to understand how to fucking teach. Sorry, I just realized I'm swearing a lot.
We're in Australia.
I assume that's fine.
Oh yeah, no, just swear as much as you fucking like. Like we don't give a shit.
Cheers. Just checking in. I've gotten in trouble before, and I literally don't notice I'm doing it.
Me too, actually.
So yeah, they don't have infrastructure, they don't have teaching knowledge, and they don't really have a place to get it from. And when they want to develop as instructors by, say, doing things like going and teaching at events or working with other schools or so on, that's usually treated like people treat that like they're doing them a favor.
Mm.
Like, oh yeah, no, you can totally come at our event and teach. Show up whenever you'd like. Which means that people without financial means, for example, don't get that exposure, don't get that access to experience.
Mm.
So lowering the cost barrier to things like attending events. And I know that some organizations, like there's RASP, which is a rapier and saber pedagogy seminar that happens in the States every year. They've started doing scholarships. I don't know how many they do, but they have a couple. But honestly, it would go.
Please send me that. Just sounds so. Like rapier and saber conference sounds amazing. So if you could message.
I was gonna say I'll send you a link after. The people that run it are real good. You know, but even things like if somebody comes to teach at your event, cover their travel costs, set them up with accommodations. It'd be nice if you could actually pay them some money for the time, but at least make it so that it doesn't cost people to teach, to get that experience. And that's kind of on a community level. The other thing that I think we really need more of is generally available teaching resources. Because our community is so spread out, because schools often kind of arise ex nihilo to a certain extent, we don't necessarily have the, oh, I trained under this person and so I'm continuing a tradition. You have a lot of people who are like, well, there's nobody in my town who does Hema, so I'm going to start a club, I guess. And what I think those of us who are more established as teachers, and those of us who, especially those of us who care about pedagogy, really ought to be doing is putting out more resources for teachers who are starting out. It was one of the big gaps I saw when I wrote and published my book, which was about kind of community building for martial arts, as I was like, nobody's talking about this and it's so important. And we don't have a lot of resources out there about how to teach Hema. Our publishing is still largely kind of at the level of like, here is a book about a source. It talks about this text. Please enjoy. And those are great, but they don't actually help with that kind of thing. Online courses, discussions like this one, like putting more and more resources out into the world and building community across instructors that transcends the boundaries of just clubs. That's my extremely long-winded answer. I'm sorry. That wandered.
I might have a point. I kind of had a bit of a reaction to something you said when you're like, there's no resources out there. I'm like, no, there's heaps of resources. And I'm like, oh, there's not much for Hema specifically.
There's basically nothing for Hema specifically, and people tend not to look outside Hema.
Yeah, whereas for me, because like, I mean, the only time I've not been doing like an unarmed martial art concurrently with Hema was when I didn't have the time or money. But I got a lot out of looking up stuff for combat sports. So, I mean, it was like almost 20 years ago now, it was a really big thing, in sort of the unarmed martial arts, of the combat sports community, be like, oh, it's not the techniques that are the problem, it's the teaching that we actually need to teach dynamically. You had like Matt Thornton with his aliveness stuff, which, and talking about like, okay, well, you need to train with increased levels of resistance. So yeah, like if you want sort of a crash course in teaching stuff, the thing that worked for me was looking up how do combat sports teach, how to, what's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu's pedagogy, what's, the pedagogy for mixed martial arts. Olympic fencing has a lot of really good stuff, because they are, combat sports pedagogy is really, really good.
And to kind of build off of that, that's the other thing that would be really valuable, I think, within Hema is like, y'all, we need to talk more to the other martial arts. This community can be very isolationist and very like, oh, no, that doesn't apply to us. We're special.
Yeah.
And interdisciplinary learning and exchange of information is going to fill in so many gaps. Because like you're absolutely right, Tim. There are resources out there. It's just people don't look at them because they're from those other things.
Well, the other thing is I've noticed as well, and this is my pet peeve with a lot of Hema, like not necessarily pedagogy. Well, actually, it does apply to pedagogy probably more than anything else. a lot of Hema people have this thing, we're a martial art, we're practical, we're for good, killing things rather than a sport. It's like,
yeah, we can't listen to sports because sports have nothing to do with us. It's like, really? Who are you murdering with your sword, buddy?
Well, here's the thing as well. We have known since the mid-90s, if you put two people in a conflict, in an armed fight together, combat sports dominate. Like, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is trained as a combat sport, and the Gracies dominated the UFC for nearly a decade.
Mm-hmm.
Boxing, kickboxing, significantly more effective than anything that's trained with these really hierarchical training, non-pressure tested training methods. And then you go back historically, you look at what's actually in the sources. These are all these were combat sports. I mean, just take back sword, like single stick was the boxing of the 17th century. But yeah, we've sort of got, there's that sort of attitude I find means a lot of people turn their nose up at the idea of being a sport. And I always get that the subtext is one of, they see it as undermining hierarchy, because in a sport, the coach is not the best fighter in the room, because frankly, if the coach was the best fighter in the room, they wouldn't be coaching, they'd be competing. The team, there's, it's usually, even in individual sports like fencing or mixed martial arts, it's still about having a gym and having a team, having a group of people that you all work together with to send to competition to go out and win. Even very, very, as competitive as it is, sports tend to be more cooperative than traditional hierarchical martial arts, because that's what's more effective at making people good at a thing. So yeah, that's kind of,
I agree with you entirely.
Yeah.
I think there's also two other psychological barriers that we come up in, particularly in the Hema community. One of which is a thing that Charles Lynn and I have talked about at length, and I'm going to crib from him a little bit, but there's a very particular kind of wish fulfillment that sword play does for a lot of people. And talking about it as a sport, talking about it as a recreational pastime, rather than a serious murder, life or death thing, breaks that fantasy for them. And undermines a particular thing that it's doing for them in terms of identity development and solidification and all of that stuff. It's serving an important function for them emotionally. And if you tell them, well, no, you got to have fun and you got to play games and we're all in this together, they're it takes something visceral away from them. So you get a lot of real strong pushback. And the other thing that I'm a little flippant and snarky about, but also I think this is way more real than it should be, is that a substantial part of the conflict in Hema around sportification, as well as the resistance to physical conditioning, is that a substantial portion of the Hema community is still relitigating the geeks versus jocks conflict of the 1980s.
Oh yeah.
Tell me I'm wrong, Tim.
No. Probably the
How much of this is nerd identity politics?
Oh, all of it.
Yeah.
It's a nerd identity politics that nerds are keeping alive. There's so much of that whole we hate sports thing going on.
Only stupid and shallow people do sports, and we are intellectuals.
It's what I find really interesting. Yeah, and it's definitely a Gen Y thing as well. I know younger people don't have quite the same division, because when you've grown up with esports and stuff, it doesn't make the same. But no, it's I mean, one of the things, probably the thing that's actually helped my fencing most in the last few years, was just doing kettlebells every day and doing a lot of fitness stuff. To the point where I can see the change in videos. I'm like, oh wow, I used to not be able to bend my legs for more than 20 seconds, and now I can quite safely sit in a bed bed fencing stance. I was repeatedly I started flirting with that idea of just focusing on fitness for a number of years, and I was repeatedly told, no, you need to work on technique. There is purity in technique, and your technique just needs to be better. And I'm there's a point where I'm oh wow, yeah, you can't expect someone to sit in a low stance or sit, stands for, a 3-minute long bout, if they can't, if they don't have the strength in their legs, and they're not going to get it, and they're not going to get it without exercising, but it's still, it is entirely a nerd identity thing, and it's nuts.
Yeah. And I think that physical capacity issue of well, you can't do the skills if you can't move your body the right way, is really exacerbated in Hema because of the fact that we have so many people coming into these arts as adults with no prior physical experience. Because again, nerd stuff.
Yeah.
So there's a large number of people who come into Hema who are effectively learning how to be active for the first time in their lives. And at the same time, there's a cultural pressure against really learning to be active because that's seen as anti-intellectual or what have you.
Yeah.
It's a real mess.
It's a mess. No, it's a nerd thing. And just something I want to add to something you said earlier about answering this question. In terms of, for me, the most useful thing in terms of understanding or getting an effective pedagogy is first understanding what kind of teacher are you. Something I realized, or for me, because I used to get very, very frustrated, people I trained with, I'm but I'm not learning anything, you're not giving me anything useful. And there's a point where I'm hang on, maybe I'm being a bit unfair. What are they I have to ask what they're trying to do. And I think there's a lot of Hema people who they're effectively lecturers. They're not, they're just getting up and presenting a body of knowledge. They've read through the manual. Here's what's in the manual. This is what it is. All right, let's practice that a bit because moving, physically doing the motions helps you learn it, but we're not actually here. We're not instructing a physical skill or creating a learning environment. We are lecturing, imparting information. And then you get instruction where people are creating a learning environment going, okay, well, a little bit of reference from the manual, let's look at the objective manual, and all right, here's now an environment where you and two training partners or a group can go away and actually work on the stuff and kind of learn their own pace and instruct like that. And then there's coaching where it's really individualized, and it's about watching someone and giving them a specific piece of advice to help them. And I think working out which of those three you want to be and don't try and combine them. The thing where I really went unstuck, actually probably the worst mistake I made with teaching, was being I'm going to lecture, and I'm going to instruct, I'm going to coach, I'm going to have all this historical information, and then I'm going to create a learning environment, but I'm also going to give individualized advice, and it just ends up being this mess. I think in terms of working out, my mentality is first work out what kind of instructor you want to be and be very clear about that. When people come to your class, say, okay, I'm just giving a lecture. I'm just going to tell you my interpretation of a bill. That's all we're doing. That's what we're doing today. Ask questions, but that's the goal of this exercise. Or say, right, this is instruction. I want you to go away and work on these drills. Please don't stop and talk about what you're meant to be doing. Just please go do it. And then, we'll come back afterwards. Or alternatively say, right, well, let's just put gear on, about for 2 minutes, take a 1 minute break. I'll give you guys some advice and then jump back into it. Just be really, really clear about what you're presenting, what type of teacher you are. So I think managing expectations like that is really important because, I've seen people get really freaking mad about lessons, just get really fired up about how much, this person sucks as a teacher. And there's a point where I'm hang on, well, usually the reason is because of
a mismatch.
Or not properly set expectations. So it's kind of, I guess it's kind of my thought.
Yeah, and kind of feeding off of that and tying back to something I said earlier, I'm a really big fan of building networks of mentorship, of as an instructor connecting really strongly with your peers, with people who are kind of in the same place in their teaching as you are, and just having people you can talk to about this stuff, having people with whom you can exchange resources, with whom you can brainstorm stuff, etc. And then also finding people who are the kind of teacher that you want to be, the flavor of teacher that you want to be, and that kind of plays on your strengths. and finding ways of learning from them, you know, and there are more people now who are kind of in a later arc of their teaching careers who are starting to make themselves available. Folks like off the top of my head, I can think of, you know, Jess Finley and Guy Windsor, one in the UK and one in the US, have both been teaching for a long time and both do kind of mentorship work as part of their Patreons and as part of consultation or whatever. People coming to, you know, or just going to events where somebody you admire is teaching and taking their workshops and seeing what they have to offer. But finding ways of building relationships with people who have something to give you, and also with people who you have something to give to, right? Like ideally, all of us should be kind of in the middle of a network where we've got people above us where we're learning from, people at our level that we are connecting with and sharing resources with, and people who are at an earlier stage in their development that we can help along the way.
Yeah, like kind of like that sort of reciprocal thing.
Yeah.
I think that sort of reciprocal kind of, as Bill said in the comments, quid pro quo sort of thing. Like I think that goes like more than just kind of like from like more than just kind of applying side to side. Like I think it's like even people who are quite experienced teachers, mentoring someone still, like, you know, when I talk about teaching to people, I still get a lot in terms of their feedback and a lot in terms
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they're not, none of these are one-way relationships, to be clear.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah. I think, well, I think it's kind
of I learned more about teaching when I started teaching other people how to teach. Like, oh my God, does that do things to your brain?
Oh yeah, no, definitely. Yes, and well, and me too. I think, I think I had the equivalent experience arguing with people about teaching as I started working in the education sector. I'm just like, hang on, the way we do this, I wouldn't be, if I did things the way you were doing it professionally, I'd get fired. Why are you doing
right? Exactly. Like, this does not meet the minimum standards of my profession. What the hell are we doing?
Yeah, then just
yeah. And I think I had a little bit of that coming into martial arts, because I was coming in, like, I started Hema around the same time that I was in grad school. So I was hot off the heels of academia and being a teaching assistant and co-teaching stuff with professors and so on. And then I got dropped into this other community and I was like, wait, this is what y'all call pedagogy? Oh dear. And I didn't know shit about martial arts, but I knew enough about teaching to be mouthy.
Yeah. Did you get a lot of people whose response was, wait, what's pedagogy?
More than I'd like. But, you know.
It's a thing. Cool. So we've got a question, I think, that flows from that. How would you suggest new club approaches dynamic teaching whilst also learning?
Oh. Be real honest with yourself about the fact that it's difficult. Straight up. One of the biggest challenges as a teacher is finding time and space and energy to still be a student. And a big thing that I think the biggest challenge that a lot of new clubs run into right off the bat is they have like one teacher. They have one person who's in charge, one person who manages all of the like admin stuff and all of that, and is also doing all the teaching. And that person usually stops learning. They don't have time to be a student. They don't have time to develop their stuff. They have to try to like carve that out around the edges of everything they're doing at the club. And part of that is that we have to be honest with ourselves that sometimes that's just going to happen. But also a thing that I would really encourage for new clubs right off the bat is to build a team. Is to have even just 2 or 3 of you. And maybe one person can be, if they're not interested in teaching, but is able to do things like handling attendance or fees or any of the admin stuff. Having running the club be a community project or be something that is shared across multiple people rather than one person's responsibility makes life way easier. It minimizes burnout. It means that when somebody gets sick, or if somebody, like, God forbid, wants to take a vacation, the whole thing doesn't just shut down. And it also provides space for teachers to still get to be students. You know, if I'm running a club with my friend Tim, and he teaches a class on Thursdays and I teach a class on Tuesdays, and we've got somebody else giving us a hand with some of the attendance and the back end stuff, then each of us can be fully committed to our teaching part, and then be like, I got nothing to do on Thursday night. I'm going to go check out Tim's class and do some learning on my part and see how he teaches things, or get better at saber because I never do that, and bring that into maybe some of my single-handed sword work. Having multiple teachers really easily creates a natural framework for doing that in a healthy way. And I honestly think that having a team is the single most important thing that you can do if you're trying to run a club. Because otherwise you burn out. You can't be the person in charge literally all the time and still enjoy what you do or have the energy for it. You'll hit a wall. Some of us do it after a year, some of us do it after 10, but it happens to everybody, and you need a plan in place for that from the start.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also, like, just even having sort of the support stuff where, you know, the teacher shouldn't be, like, the instructor shouldn't also be the organizer, or, you know, and shouldn't be also needing to run the finances and stuff. And like, I know that can be really, really difficult when you're a small club. Like, I am, you know, as someone who is committed, you know, is ideologically committed to small club, like running a small club, it's still, I think it's still kind of important to have, like, just to have help, or just to be like, okay, well, I don't have to worry about sorting out, you know, sorting out the bank account on top of, you know, booking the hall on top of then coming up with a curriculum. I think the other thing as well is also be really honest where you're at with your teaching. Like, I think, like, this is kind of why I like the game master metaphor is, like, you have to be a really, really bad GM before people will not want to play with you. Like, if you you
can get by for a long time being a thoroughly mediocre GM and people will still play.
Yeah, exactly. But no one has the expectation that you'll be, like, no one has that expectation that the GM will be perfect because we're just playing a game. But because, well, I would suggest it's because school is so hierarchical, and we have that, and especially when we have that notion that, you know, the teacher is the best person in the class. It's one of the things that frustrates me, especially with martial arts, and you hear this in, like, the MMA community all the time. It's like, if someone comes to your class and they're a better fighter than you, then they should take over teaching. I'm like, no,
that's not their job.
That's a disaster waiting to happen. No, like, I think just be thoroughly open about, like, you're new to teaching, and also when you're teaching, don't think about imparting knowledge. Don't think about, like, going out and desperately finding the knowledge and then dumping it into the heads of who you're teaching. Think about it like the way a game master approaches role playing, where you're creating an environment for the people, there to flourish and have fun. So, if you've got a particular thing that you need to teach, like, say I'm teaching, like, opposition or something, I'll explain what it is, and I'll set a bunch of drills that I think will help teach it. But, if people want to change the drill or go off topic or have feedback or whatever, that's fine. And even the drills are meant to be very, very open-ended in terms of, like, cool, just attack each other, and the other person tries to hit you while you do it. And if they don't, you've succeeded. If they do, you fail. Like, just, I think.
And kind of
about that.
Yeah, and kind of to tie into that, there's sort of this idea that when you start a club, you need to have, like, a formal teaching format. You need to have a person who is in charge of the class, and like Tim said, they are imparting knowledge or they are facilitating the drills. And I think there's a lot of value in the study group. There's a lot of value in the format of, like, hey, when our club is starting out, anybody who's interested in longsword, let's meet on Tuesday nights from this hour to this hour. And you can bring the sources that you're working on, and you can maybe have people scheduled to, like, okay, on this week it's Tim's turn to talk about what he's doing and what he's excited about. Maybe he'll lead a couple drills. But the idea that the goal of the environment is not teaching and learning as two separate things, as that kind of one-way flow of information, but rather that it's a space where everybody's coming to learn, including the person who's nominally in charge. And often when you have those more informal spaces, you'll kind of get like over time, order will emerge from that chaos. It starts out with everybody show up and I guess we'll do some longsword and we'll see. And 6 months later, you're like, okay, turns out we're all really interested in the German KDF tradition. So let's focus on that for a while and see what we get out of it. Hey, Tim is like actually really good at running this kind of drill. So maybe he can be in charge of doing that kind of thing sometimes. And somebody else over here has some really interesting translation insight. So maybe we'll tap them as if they're interested, we can help develop them as the like lecturer component or whatever. And like things will shake out a little bit. I am a very, very big proponent in all contexts of the fuck around and find out approach, where you have periods in your training or in your creation of a club or what have you, where you deliberately allow for things to be messy, where you deliberately allow for things to be a little bit chaotic, where you deliberately loosen up the structure so that there's room for interests to emerge, for student needs to kind of come to the fore, for people's interests to really drive what they do. And from that, you usually get a new or more valuable structure, and a more interesting one and a more applicable one to your group of people than you do if you come in with like, I am running a school, so I am going to do things this way, I guess. Let's try it for a year and see how it goes. Like, you can do that as long as you're open to change.
Yeah, I think with that sort of like, I'm going to run things, and sometimes you do need to run things for like a few months before they really start working. I mean, I think like just as long as you're very open about the fact that you're doing something that you think will work and seeing how it goes, like that that process is still part of the fucking around and finding out approach. Because I think I think this is a bit of a problem with Hema is people will start from the perspective of, I want to run a Hema skill, I know a bit of Hema, I'm just going to run a curriculum, and then because they've got enough experience that they can that they can easily beat anyone who comes in with no experience, it sort of goes to their head a bit, and then the next thing is they're acting like they're sort of a grandmaster. It's like that's not a good environment, and that's not what's happening here. What's happening here is that you have a degree of skill and you're teaching classes. There's still, you still have to kind of have that approach of just going, I'm here to provide an experience, and I'm not like, that doesn't make me anything other than a game master, like a game master role-playing game, basically.
Yeah, or I'm here to create a space where we all get to learn stuff. That's the thing I'm offering, is an opportunity to learn this cool sword thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And you always want to be one of the people that's learning, right? Even if not in the moment when you're teaching, you're like, as an instructor, I never want to be in an environment or in a position where I have nothing to learn.
Oh yeah,
that's death.
Yeah, semi-literally, and I found when there's a point where I was doing just instructing, I realized that a lot, and I was developing drills to help develop very specific skills that I thought were lacking. I realized after about a couple of months of that I was lacking those skills that I was developing drills for, but because I wasn't doing the drills, like the only time I get to do the drills is when there was an odd number of people in the class. All of a sudden I was just getting ruined because everyone had learned the things that I've been trying. Everyone had done the drills, and people learn. Obviously, I think it's more accurate to say they're learning from the drills than they are learning from me. But I had this huge.
They got the mileage in, right?
Yeah.
They got to do the thing, and you got to stand on the side and watch them do the thing, and that has predictable outcomes in terms of who gets better at doing the thing.
All right, cool. So the next question: if you could teach a brand new student only one thing, what would it be and why?
So this is coming very much from the perspective of a Hema instructor, where a lot of the people that come into our arts have very low physical literacy to begin with. I would teach them how to notice what their body is doing.
Yeah.
And what their body is feeling. Like, if you are able to figure out where your body is in space, if you've got decent proprioception, if you can adjust it based on what you feel, like based on feedback it gives you, like, oh, hey, I feel unstable or off balance. Let me bring myself to a place that feels better. Or, hey, this thing I'm doing hurts, I'm going to adjust it. Or I'm going to ask someone to adjust it for me because I've noticed that it hurts. You can learn anything. Like people who are strongly connected to their bodies, who understand what their boundaries and limits are, who can tell when they're getting tired or when they're getting sore, and who can go, oh, hey, this thing I'm doing feels weird. Let's figure out how to fix it. Are the best students in the world, and you can teach them literally anything.
Yeah.
And if there's, and that's the thing, like, I want to teach people, like, my big thing is I want to teach people how to learn good. Because then they can go learn from not just me, but from anybody in the world and get awesome at it. They're not just limited to understanding my style or my methodology. And the fastest track to being a good learner of physical skills is building a close relationship with your body and what it is capable of and what it needs. And also, like, modern humans are shit at that, at least in the Western world.
Oh, yeah. No, I think...
oh, my God.
I'm actually going to start... Part of the boxing wrestling I did had a lot of that kind of, like, actually had that approach of you need to move on, get in touch with your body. And, you know, like, in order to do this, this instructor was very explicit about if you can move well, you can learn fast. And, like, not only is that really true, like, I remember I've been doing probably about a year of boxing wrestling. And then myself and my Dark Ages Club went and tried archery, and I was able to pick it up really, really quickly compared to a lot of other people because I could work out the biomechanics of it really quickly. But the other thing as well is it's just really, like, I had basically chronic back pain for quite a while, and then I started doing boxing wrestling, so actually working on, like, getting my body moving. And, you know, now I have to both drink a lot and sleep very badly to have, you know, debilitating levels, like the debilitating levels of back pain I used to have. So yeah, it was like, no, I like, that's kind of this, yeah, I'd answer the same thing, is just get people moving, like, get them, and, like, I think it's important to be very open about why you're doing that, because I've seen classes where you go and you do a bunch of moving stuff, and because, you know, people are like, why are we doing Pilates? I wanted to do sword fighting. It's like, no, this is to let, you know, you're leveling up your dexterity so that to increase your sword skill. That's how it works.
Yeah, I'm a really big fan of telling people why they're doing a thing. Boy, does it help.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes you don't tell them why they're doing a thing until immediately after they've done it, if that's the specific need of your drill. But in general, you build in the expectation that you're not just going to make people do shit for no reason. There is always a reason. There is always an intention behind how they're learning, and that builds really important trust as well.
Yeah. Well, I think it's, yeah, and also I think it's quite empowering to know why you're doing something. Like, yep, cool. So I've got so that next question, and I think we're going to have to finish up soon because it's getting kind of fine for time. But we've probably got maybe 2 more questions. So first off, Heather wants to know about that. How shit modern humans are at self-awareness. How do you even start? And how do you even start with that?
That's a good question, right? The biggest thing that I do in a lot of my classes, and this is something that, like, you can absolutely do on your own, is getting people to move in ways that are outside of their regular movement patterns. So, like, one of the things that we used to start a lot of group classes off with was, all right, first 5 minutes, we're going to do weird animal movement stuff. We're gonna crawl across the floor first. And the second time we're going to do a bear crawl when our arms and legs are straight and our butt's way up in the air. And the next time we're going to try to move like a monkey. And the next and we would like make shit up. We would be like, all right, somebody name an animal. And somebody would be like, I don't know, a chameleon. And we'd be like, okay, cool. How would a chameleon move? And you'd make it up on the spot. So we'd be like, be a squirrel. It's like, okay, I'm going to be a squirrel. And everybody else has to be a squirrel. Playing like that, especially getting people to do movements that they are not accustomed to, makes your body better at learning movement. Making you do things that you have not done before makes you better at doing stuff that you haven't done before. And it's a very easy thing to start with by just movement play and games. And that can literally be 5 minutes of practice. The other thing, like that's honestly one of my favorite things. There's so many things that you can do with a bouncy ball. There's one day I'm going to release like a 20-minute instructional video on all of the amazing things you can do to develop your movement skills and your proprioception with a bouncy ball and a flat surface. Things like you know, playing with catching it different ways on the bounce and so on. Like there's so much you can do. But just moving in novel ways. And then when you're figuring out how to do the weird movement, having your attention be on figuring that out, on making the thing work. Not on whether you're doing it right, not on whether you're going to impress your instructor, not on whether this is relevant to that one very narrow skill you want to learn, but just being in the moment of like, I'm just doing this thing. For the next 30 seconds, I'm going to be the best fucking squirrel I can be. How do I make myself the most like a squirrel? And it sounds really dumb, but that requires having an awareness of how your body moves, thinking about the way that different things move. You know, squirrels move differently from humans. So how does a human naturally move when they're on all fours, and how does that differ from a squirrel, and how do I bring those two closer to each other? That is a lot of proprioceptive work that you're doing. That's a lot of cognitive problem solving around how move good.
Yeah.
Bouncy ball games are the same thing, or even what I'll also do is integrate it into martial arts drilling. And when something goes wrong, when the mechanics of a thing don't work, when somebody is trying to do a technique and it fails, rather than correcting them, you go, hey, something interesting that happened. Can you tell me why? Getting people to figure out why something went wrong. And you know, we can coach each other through that. That can become a group exercise. Those are ways that we can help each other. But like getting people to notice what happened when they're doing stuff with swords is so important. And I'll often do drills that are like, okay, this is one of my favorite things that I've started doing I started doing during the pandemic when we had to run classes over Zoom because nobody could touch each other. So we were doing a lot of solo drilling. And one thing I would do for a while is I'd put on a piece of music that was about 3 minutes long, because that's a decent amount of time to make somebody move continuously. Have them go do like flow work with a longsword. Be like, okay, just move in ways that, you know, try to link your cuts together fluidly and try to move to the music. That gives them kind of a little mental thing to catch on to. And then at the end of it, I'd be like, okay, cool. Everybody tell me one interesting thing that you noticed about how you were moving. And after a while, you build up that expectation that when you move, when you're doing solo stuff, you should be able to note something about how your body is interacting with the sword or how your body is interacting with the world. And just building that, like it's like building muscle. It's like building any habit. It's like building any pattern, building that thought pattern of reflecting on how you move is so important. And it's a relatively easy thing to sneak into whatever you do. And like, I'll do it at home. I'll be standing at the sink washing dishes and be like, how am I standing right now? Oh, that's really interesting. One of my hips is higher than the other. Why the fuck am I doing that? Oh, I've rotated slightly to... And it can be really silly things. It can be like, there's a mess on the counter over there and it makes me anxious to look at it. So I've subtly changed my posture so that I can't see the dirty dishes in the corner. And that's gagging up how I stand. Fascinating. And then I can either correct it or I'd be like, no, I really don't want to look at those dishes. I'm going to keep doing this.
Yeah.
And just noting why your body does the things it does is so valuable.
Oh yeah, that's really interesting. Actually, I discovered recently that I'm actually a little bit flat-footed, and I just because I didn't have very much to do under COVID, I'm like, oh, I just went on YouTube, looked up some exercise routines to fix flat feet, which I've been doing, and then I'm like, oh wow, I'm now lunging faster and better just because I fixed that. And then I'm like, and then from there I'm like, oh, actually I might have glute activation issues. And then actually went back and looked at old videos of me fencing. I'm like, oh wow, yeah, you can like. There's a lot of 2-minute bout videos where the first 30 seconds I've got a decent stance and a decent lunge, and then it just all goes to shit. And that's the point where like I'm tired and I'm like, and I can see like my knees dipping in and I can see my pelvis tilting out. I'm like, huh, and I'm like, and then I tried just like shadow sparring, and I'm like, I can go for a lot longer without like, my structure collapsing now just because I've been working on fixing that alignment. And yeah, it's just an amazing thing to start thinking that. I really like the animal exercise though. I'm definitely going to steal that.
It is so fun, and it works really good for that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, like I guess for me, I got a lot out of doing kettlebells. There's a lot of kettlebell exercises, particularly like things like Turkish get-ups, goblet squats, stuff like that. They're overhead presses. They're moving a lot of your body in ways it needs to move. And I think there's
and they require like strong connection and good structure to actually work.
Yeah, like it's sort of I think it's like Turkish get-ups, swings, goblet squats, and overhead presses. If you do just those, if you do just those, and you can do like a set of that in like 20 minutes, you've moved your body in all of the cardinal directions it needs to move. And just in terms of like redressing kind of any physical issues that you have from, sitting in an office chair all day, like that goes a really long way to doing it. Oh yeah, like that was a big thing for me. But yeah, no, I'm going to do the animal one now because that just sounds like too much fun.
Yeah, I'm going to actually add one more silly fun thing you can do in there, because it is kind of my final, the final answer to how make people better at body awareness. Because a lot of times the internal cues, the internal indicators of like, how are my hips moving? What are my shoulders doing? How is everything connected? That stuff can be subtle, or it can be hard to notice initially. Like you're like, I don't know what my body is doing. Like, and because again, that takes a while to develop as a skill. A really, really valuable thing to do is to find ways of making those cues louder, of making that information more visible. One simple way is adding load to things. This is why things like Turkish get-ups and overhead presses and so on are really wonderful, because they add load and they add weight to your body structure, and you can immediately be like, oh, I thought I was standing up straight, but it turns out I am super not, because this load is bringing my arm down. Pushing against a wall can do that. Even really simple things like if you're trying to figure out what kind of position your body is in when you're trying to like hold a posture, doing it against a wall, or even doing it lying down. Lying down is great because gravity presses your body into the floor just a little bit. And all of a sudden you've got all of this pressure pushing against your body, telling you where it is. And it's a lot easier to notice what it's doing. And the last really fun one that I figured this out when I was running an April Fool's workshop called Secrets of Princess Style Martial Arts. Because my April Fool's joke was, I'm going to take the girliest, cheesiest, least martial thing that people can think of, and I'm going to do a really good job of teaching punching and throwing doing it. So it was a wrestling and striking workshop, but the theme was princesses, and we built a whole bunch of princess stuff around it.
You have to send as many details of this as you can, because
I will send you my lecture notes. It was so much fun.
Please do.
But one of the things that we did was I had the students put on like a really floofy tutus while they were working jab cross combinations. Because one of the really important things about recycling punches in boxing is getting your hip snap going, right? It's your hips and your shoulders have to be moving together as a team. It's not just arm stuff. And when you're doing that correctly, if you're wearing a floofy skirt, the skirt twirls. It stays up in the air and you can see it. And if you do it in front of a mirror, or what we actually did was we only had like 2 skirts and we had a group of, I think, like a dozen students. So what we did is we had everybody stand in a circle and they would pass the skirts around. And it was kind of like a moderately competitive thing of like, let's see who can make their skirt swoosh the most. And so when you're doing it, you get visual feedback. You can see that your hips are doing the thing because the skirt goes swoosh. And even if you don't have a mirror, you can see it in your peripheral vision. There's this thing that twirls up. And when you see other people doing it, you see that skirt twirl. And then from there, it kind of makes it easier for you to read what their body is doing.
Yeah.
So the skirt ends up amplifying the movement of one key body part. And then you look at it and you're like, oh shit, those hips. I can see it. I can see how the hips and the shoulders are working together. Because you use the tutu to kind of amplify the signal of what they're doing.
That's incredible.
So yeah, seriously, punch in a tutu. It is amazing how quickly people generate power.
I'm gonna try. I have to try this. Not just because I get to wear a tutu, but it just sounds amazing. Well, I guess kind of off the back of that, and moving into sort of our final question for the night. How do you come up with drills? Like, what's your process for coming up with this stuff?
So, 2 really, really, really big caveats. Caveat number 1, I've been teaching for a long time and a lot of this stuff just lives in my head. Caveat number 2, I am definitely not neurotypical, and the way that I manage planning in particular is pretty closely related to my ADHD rather than to like really good pedagogical process. But I prefer to make things up on the fly. I prefer to be responsive to the needs of the moment. What I generally do when I'm teaching a class or a workshop is I will have a very clear idea of what my goals are that day. Like, this is the concept that I want people to grasp, or this is the movement skill that I want people to work on, or what have you. That is super clear to me. I have a general structure for how I'm going to run my class. We're going to start with a physical warm-up that gets people into their bodies, that gets people thinking the right way. We'll do a little bit of a workout so that they're nice and warm, and also they're aware of how their shoulders and their hips connect. And then we're going to do some flow work so that they can connect to their weapons. And then the last chunk, we're going to do drills, which is usually just problem solving or improvisation around that theme. And sometimes I'll have an idea of like a couple drills that I might want to try. I use them maybe half the time. What generally happens is I pay attention to my students during the first chunk of class when we're doing fairly rote things, when we're warming up, when we're doing a little bit of a workout, when I put on music and I make them do flow drills and then I make them tell me what they found interesting. Often what they tell me is far more interesting or far more relevant than anything I could have come up with beforehand. Yeah. So I set up my class, and I usually teach like 1.5 or 2 hour chunks. The first half of it is effectively the teachers feeding me data, or the students feeding me data about what they need. I'll look at how their bodies move, and I'd be like, whoa, everybody's stiff today. We haven't done swords in a while. Okay, today's going to be a movement rehab class. Or, everybody keeps doing that one particular movement pattern that we were training for a while, and there's something really weird going on in it. We should tweak that. Or they'll tell me like, hey, I was trying to do this thing. And for flow work, I'll give them a goal sometimes. I'll be like, okay, in today's flow work. Yeah, sorry, I'll actually expand on this a little bit because it is relevant to my method.
Yes.
Flow work will be tied to the topic. So for example, if we're working on, like right now, one of the things we're working on in class is we're working on Marazzo, so 16th century Northern Italian sword play, specifically the sword in 2 hands, longsword. And we're working on transitioning from his fighting at long range to his infighting, basically. And we've been doing the long range fighting for a really long time. That's what people are used to because we did it through the whole pandemic. So when we do flow work, I'll put on like 3 songs in a row. And the first song will be, all right, pick up your sword, just move to the music. Get yourself comfortably moving with your sword again. It's basically a warm-up for that. And then for the second one, if I'm thinking about that transition, I'll be like, okay, now what I want you to do is make movements as large as you possibly can. Think of extending your reach as far as it goes. Try to only work through the guards that tend to show up in that large movement. So I basically give people constraints to work within. They're like, go do flow work, go move however you want, but you're moving big. You're playing as if you were at large range. And then in the last set, I'll be like, okay, and now I want you to tighten up all of your movements. I want you to work with the sword directly in front of you. I want you to think of not extending your reach long, but instead keeping yourself protected and maintaining control of the engagement the whole time. How does that movement look to you? And go play with that. And then I watch what happens with the students. And then at the end, I'm like, okay, now tell me some of the things you noticed when you were transitioning from this big wide play to working at closer range. And somebody will be like, for example, well, it was really weird when I was trying to like stop my cuts right in front of me. I noticed I got really tired. I kept cutting to this like short measure or this short guard. And it sucked and it made my back tight. And I'll be like, okay, cool. And then when we get to the lesson time, I'll be like, all right, so the first thing that we're going to talk about is the fact that usually when you end up in these tight guards up close, it's because what's actually happened is somebody's intercepted your sword. Right? I'm not necessarily stopping short most of the time, even if that's what shows up in like the plays, the kind of forms that we do. I'm interacting with something else. So let's bring that in. Let's experience what it's like to cut into having somebody stop you. See how that feels physically, see how much less work it is when somebody else's sword is there. And then from that, we can start playing with momentum and going, okay, so what happens if I am moving really fast and somebody stops my sword? What options do I have coming off of that? And you can see I'm inventing a set of drills in my head at this point for an imaginary class. But that's basically how it works for me, is I have my students feed me as much information as I can get out of them in the first chunk that is relevant to the topic at hand. And then we create little games or little problem-solving scenarios that address the things that are engaging them at the moment. And I usually try to find ways to kind of like, pull that all into the main topic or the goal that I have in my head. But as much as possible, I work with what the students give me rather than what I'm bringing in myself. Because if nothing else, they pay a lot more attention and they learn a lot better when you are directly responding to their needs. like people learn good when you respond to them.
Making something for people. Yeah,
it turns out that's good.
Yeah. No, I think that's I think that's a really important thing as well, with just having classes that are structured to the need of the students. Because I mean, I don't know how many years I did of martial arts where I'd go to a class and just learn nothing new. But still, at the same time, that I'd come to like sparring or whatever, and I'd still be really struggling because what was being taught was not the thing that I needed. It was, it was whatever the standard curriculum was or whatever, had been written down. I mean, you hear stories about like curriculums that are set out, or people using the same curriculums for years on end.
Oh yeah, I know people that have not changed their curriculum one bit in 5 years. And it's written out by day, by class, and you're like, how do you not lose your mind teaching that? Never mind its pedagogical effectiveness. Like, how are you not bored out of your skull, my friend?
I can sympathize with that. Like, I think like there's a point where I refused. I had like a really reasonably well set out like beginner's lesson that I refused to teach for about a year because I just got so bored of teaching it. I was like, I'm just going to, if I get a new person, I'm just going to focus on a really specific element of the basics. Because I can't handle just going, all right, here's the first 7 cuts. Here's how to lunge. Here's tierce and cut. Here's making them high and low. I totally get that. I think like making up stuff on the fly, that's really, really, that's really important. That's really cool as well. I think it also just because it makes it interesting for you as an instructor.
Yeah. And I think you do need like structure around that. Like I said, like the way that my classes are laid out doesn't really vary. Students know what to expect in terms of what like the flow of the day is going to be. And creating that kind of like predictable functional framework means that you can fuck around within it, means that you can improvise, means that you can innovate, because people know what to expect, they feel safe, and the structure is built to give you the information you need in order to be able to improvise or to fuck around. The last thing that I kind of wanted to say to really respond to what you were saying, Tim, about getting bored as an instructor, is I think that one thing we can all do as teachers to be kinder to ourselves and also to become better teachers is to pay attention to our own boredom. Because when you get sick of the material you're teaching, that means that it's falling short in some capacity. Often what I find is that when I am bored out of my damn skull with how I'm teaching a thing, it's because my approach to it has slightly shifted and my old method doesn't quite fit anymore, but I'm still trying to make it work. Or my understanding of the topic has grown and I feel like the part that I'm teaching is insufficient or it's not exciting because it doesn't include the new information. And one of the things that I've learned to do over time, and again, it's something I'm pretty transparent about with my students, is when I am bored out of my skull with the thing that I am teaching or with the way that I'm teaching it, that's my cue to look at what I'm doing and revise it. And go, something here doesn't work. Because odds are very, very good that if they're not working for you as a teacher, they're not working for your students.
Yeah, that's really...
Or at minimum, even if the students are still okay with it, if you are bored and you are mentally checked out when you're teaching, because that is an inevitable reaction to your own boredom, then you are a worse teacher. You're less present in the moment, you're less attentive, you're less emotionally invested in what's happening, and your teaching will suffer. And there is a kind of tendency among teachers to be like, well, you know, we got to kind of martyr ourselves a little bit. And if we're bored, that's just how we're serving the community. And whatnot. It's like, no. If you're bored, the students are bored. Fucking stop it.
This is recreational.
Also, first of all, we're doing this for fun. If it sucks, stop doing it. But also, boredom is not meaningless. It's a cue that something isn't working for your brain anymore, and it's worth exploring what that is. And sometimes you might be like, okay, you know what? I get what's going on, but really I'm not quite ready to change this, and I need to grit my teeth through it for another month, and then I'll revisit it. But I think it's a really useful kind of reflective exercise or habit to get into with yourself.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's a really good point. I think that's something in terms of advice for teachers. And also actually for students as well. I think like if students notice that in their teachers, it's probably worth saying, hey, you don't really seem to be enjoying this. Like, can we change, we're not enjoying it as a result. Can we change it up? But,
Hey, instructor, nobody here is happy is incredibly valuable feedback. And like sometimes when you're the instructor, it really sucks to get that feedback. It can make you sad, but it is so much less painful than having students just not come back one day. And you not knowing why.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, boredom is a team problem. We can work to solve it together.
And I guess that kind of, just to sort of round things up, because it's very close to end time. I guess kind of like that's sort of the theme of tonight, I think, or today. It's not where you are. It's not somewhere in the world.
I was going to say it's 9:30 where I am, but it's midday where you are. And also today is Saturday and today is Sunday. Time is wild.
But I think that's kind of a theme, is just to view like lessons as a cooperative project. Like that reciprocal thing of like, just if the teacher is bored, the students are probably bored, like the students are probably frustrated. And if the students are frustrated, then like just like seeing it as a learning process where everyone can correct what they're doing. Like don't sort of fall into that mindset of going, well, unless the teacher is perfect and is, the best fighter in the class and the best teacher in the world and blah, 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 then there's something wrong. It's like, no, if you notice something wrong, that just means that we need to change what we're doing. And even like, I think to the extent of just because something is wrong now doesn't mean that doing that thing wasn't right, like
Yes.
even a couple of months ago. So yeah, it's a reciprocal thing. It's actually
Yeah.
yeah.
And I really like how you're emphasizing kind of that acknowledgement that we're all growing and that we're all changing together, and the way that, the way that we teach now is not going to be the way that we teach in 10 years, and it's not the way we taught 2 years ago or even maybe 6 months ago. And that's not a failure. That's not proof that we were a terrible teacher before and now we are a good teacher. It's just like how learning works. And if we can accept that that is the deal, and we can decouple it from our egos, and not feel that having a bad class or having a student who doesn't respond to what you're doing, or having a lesson not work, like not treating that as a personal failure, but treating that as part of the deal. There's so much room to grow, and everybody's so much happier as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, one thing I've kind of fallen out of the habit of doing, but I kind of need to get back into, was at the end of every lesson I'd ask, while we're just putting our gear away and getting ready to go to the pub, is to say, right, I want everyone to tell me one thing that they liked about the class that I could repeat or expand. So like something that they'd like to see again, and one thing that I could add, change, or subtract. So like, what's something that would improve the class? And that was really really valuable for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I think definitely. Cool. So I think on that note,
I was gonna say that's a nice note to end on.
Yeah, and actually, maybe if you watch in the comments on YouTube or the discussion in Facebook, just say one thing that you like and you'd like to see more of, hopefully, and one thing you can change or subtract. So
yeah, there we go. Start now, Tim.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, we're doing calls to action. Sort of throw in my obligatory, if you can pitch in a little bit to help the Old Sword Club continue the shenanigans. We've got a PayPal link you can donate at. Obviously, I'm very committed to trying to get as many free resources out there as possible, but we do have to pay for domain hosting and stuff like that, and probably insurance in like a few months when you get.
I was going to say, we all want these things to be out there. We all want our information to be accessible, but also we all live under capitalism and we need money to survive. It's very stupid, but it is part of the deal.
Yes. So yeah, if even if you hate capitalism, please donate. Cool. And if you want more Kaja, check out their website. Also, you've got a book as well that
yes, which is on my website.
Yes. I didn't realize that you had a book until after I'd asked you. So I'm like, I have to get this book now. And
say, Tim, read my book.
Yes.
It's about pedagogy.
Yes. So yes, so just give. So yes, everyone else should give in to like peer pressure and also buy the book. I
am actually going to do one last bit of shameless self-promotion before we go.
Oh yes. And if you have a shameless promotion to post in the event, please post in the event as well. Like, be as shameless as you like.
I'll throw a link in. Next weekend, next Saturday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. I have no idea what that is for Team Australia, but I know we've got people in this chat from all over the world. I will be teaching an online workshop on workshop design. So it is part of the Big Gay Sword Year initiative that Valkyrie is running, where we run accessible, very friendly workshops by queer and trans instructors. And we've been kind of offering them online over the course of the year. Mine is going to be the 4th one, I think. We've had some really awesome people come up before this. And it's kind of a nice follow-on to the conversation that we've been having here, where it's just is going to be me talking about how I approach designing workshops for teaching at events or as a guest instructor at other schools. Because I know that that's, again, a separate skill set, a specific thing that people need to know how to do. And not something that necessarily gets talked about all that much. So I want to put that out there as a resource. It is a paid event, but it's got sliding scale pricing. I believe the accessible price is $10, standard is $20, generous is $30, and you can pay whatever you'd like. And if you are somebody who is experiencing enough financial hardship that $10 is out of your range, then you can message or email us at BGSY, and we'll make sure that you can still get in, because this is the thing that we want to have out there.
Sweet. And I while you were promoting, I went and found the event, and I've now posted it.
Yes,
everywhere,
perfect.
So, yes.
People have a link.
Yes. Excellent. Cool. Yeah. Thank you again. This was just really the most amazing discussion. So, yeah. No.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. All right. Cool. And just before I forget, normally, as much as we normally meet at Zoom on Zoom after these, we won't be today, just due to time constraints. But yeah, we'll be back next Wednesday with a lesson on creating angles and controlling distance. And yeah, but more importantly, thank you, Kaja. It was amazing.
Thank you so much for having me, Tim. This was really lovely.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.